Yeah.
So attention is your child's currency, whether it's positive attention or negative attention. They want it and they want it all.
Hey guys, and welcome to the SkilledDad podcast. My name's Zach Reeser. I'm your host, and here we go. 2024 is a rockin', and we're gonna kick the beginning of this year off with like somebody that has like real credentials. So this is gonna be killer. I'm gonna learn a lot. I've already been asking a bunch of questions, and already learned all the things I'm not doing well. So that's why we have this podcast, is to help you and me and others learn some tips and tricks. And so today I have Dr. Andrea Mata with me, who is not only the author of the nice reflection, #2 parenting book, the practical tips for the pooped out parent. And there's a little quip on the back of that I shared with my wife, and she thought it was hilarious. And we should probably talk about that later. But we've had a number of conversations up prior to like hitting record. And Andrea is just a lot of fun to be around and talk to, and also puts a lot of great stuff out, especially on LinkedIn. So follow her on LinkedIn. We'll get to that. But Andrea, thank you for joining me on SkilledDad podcast.
Hello, hello. Thanks for having me. I'm excited. Am I your first woman?
No.
Oh, okay then.
You were the second. My wife was the first.
Oh, that makes complete sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's funny that you say that, because when I shared with her that we were going to be meeting, she's like, wait, you're having another woman on the podcast? And I'm like, well, you were on the podcast, and Andrea is awesome and has a lot of really good tips. And at the end of the day, this podcast is about learning and equipping ourselves with knowledge, and she's just dropping knowledge bombs everywhere. So yeah, she's going to come on here and drop some of those knowledge bombs. But yeah, she brought that up, and then she's like, okay, totally makes sense. And I told her about your book, and she's like, that's hilarious.
You could have her on again.
I probably will. Here, like, for all those, yeah, she had like one of the highest like download rates, and it continues to go, because nobody wants to listen to me, but all the moms like listen to her, and they tuned in. She told her friends, and bada bing, there we go. She'll be back.
That's the other thing. Like when I was doing a podcast, the Bright Spot podcast, and we did like a season where it's like more like psychological cognitive tips. And then I moved into like more interviewing because my co-host, she went and had a baby. How rude.
That's pretty rude.
I know, right? And then so then I started doing an interview format. And when I had my husband on, it was like the most popular one. I think it might still be.
You should probably have him join you next time, and I'll have my wife, join me again. And I definitely married up, so it would be the smart thing to do for me. But so Andrea, normally I ask a question that a lot of people don't like, and it's just kind of fun, but it leads to good things. And that's tell us about yourself. But I won't do that today, unless you really want to dive into that, because you're going to tell us about yourself. But I have one like burning question that I've not asked you in all of this. And so you've recently launched your book. I want to hear about your background, but before we get to that, I want to understand like the #2. I mean,
#2.
Why the #2 parenting book? Why not #1?
Why? I get that question all the time. They're like, wait, so this is your second book? And I'm like, no, it's my first book. And they're like, I'm so confused. And I'm like, because the whole premise of the book is practical parenting tips and the amount of time it takes to poop.
Boom.
A mom poop, not a dad poop.
That's the part that,
because y'all take 45 minutes.
Yeah, well,
poop. What is up with that? What are you doing?
So my son the other day,
all the dads,
I walked in, I was like, where's Graham? He's my eldest. And my wife's like, well, he's in the bathroom. I'm like, okay, well, did he just walk in there? No, he's been in there for a while. He wasn't like, he was in there and the door was shut. He wasn't even going to the bathroom. He's like,
how old is he?
Almost 9.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he walked out. He's like, hey, Dad. And I'm like, hey, what are you doing? He's like, I'm reading. I'm like, I said, you've learned the ways quickly. He's like, yeah, I've learned that if I can go into the bathroom, it's like the main place where nobody actually hurries me out or comes in and bothers me. I was like, oh, don't tell anybody the secret. So I don't know. That's it.
Unless you're a mom.
That's his perspective. Well, I can't speak to that, but yeah, that's what it sounds like. And that's why my wife thought it was
Kids will
hilarious.
find you.
I've seen it happen. Yeah. So I guess it's just
Mhm.
I don't know, just natural not to bother dad in the office. I guess
The second office.
that is the number two office. Yeah, not the first.
It
Uh,
is the number two office.
totally makes sense. Thank you for clarifying that for me. And anyone that was maybe when they first heard the number two parenting book, like, why? And again, my wife she heard that. She's like, that is so perfect. And she's like,
Hmm.
this whole conversation happened not but a week ago,
Hmm.
for that reason. So, I would love to hear a little bit more about your background and what led you to writing the book. And I will just kind of hand the baton over to you and probably just ping you with questions along the way and make you really nervous because it seems like you're the nervous type. No, you were not the nervous type. I think it's gonna be amazing. So take it away.
um, so I was born on the south side of Chicago to my dad's originally from Mexico, so I am what I call a whitexican. And my mom is white and I am Mexican, and he's from a part of Mexico where there's like a lot of German and French settlement.
Mm,
And so there's Mexicans that are 100% Mexican, but they have like fair skin, blonde hair, and blue green eyes.
yeah.
So I call myself a whitexican. We grew up very enmeshed in that Mexican culture because my dad's the patriarch of his family.
Hmm.
And the kind of the big thing, the defining moment of my life. So I was the youngest of three older brothers. And when I was 11, my brother was murdered when
Mm,
he was 18 by a man that he thought was his friend.
mm,
And so fast forward 2 years, and my parents and I are sitting in a courtroom for sentencing of the man who murdered my brother. My older two brothers, Jose and Fidel, were not allowed to be in the courtroom
mm,
because they did not trust themselves not to attack
mm,
the guy that murdered their younger brother.
mm,
And so I remember sitting there and we had given our impact statements. And if you don't know what an impact statement is, it's how the criminal's crimes impacted your life.
hmm.
And so at the age of 13, I had to step into the witness stand and look at the guy who murdered my brother, who then immediately looked down. I was like, what a turd.
Mm,
Um, and so I read my impact statement. My mom read hers. And then my brothers, Fidel's and Jose's, were read by the DA. My dad didn't read one just because of his thick accent.
hmm.
And so he was like, no, thank you.
Mm,
And then the judge recessed and then he came back and he looked at my parents and he looked at me and he paused and he's like, you know what? I'm not going to sentence this man to death, even though it meets all the criteria for the death penalty, whether you agree with the death penalty or not. That's not
mm,
what the story's about. But he looked at us and he was like, I'm not sentencing this man to death, not because of moral or professional objections against the death penalty, but because this man had a rough life.
mm,
And I'm just sitting there like, what? Like, you you have a rough life, and so that means you can, like, be okay to murder people? Like,
mm,
I don't know about that. So from then on, I was like, "Okay, what do I wanna do with this?" And I remember being in 6th grade and being like, "You know what? I'm gonna be a lawyer." And I'm like, nah." So then I decided to become a clinical child psychologist who specializes in the treatment of antisocial and aggressive behavior
mm,
so that I can try to prevent other 11-year-old girls from losing their best friend because someone had a rough life.
mm,
So essentially, whenever I do clinical work, whenever I have clients, they're kind of like a form of the murderer as, a kid and trying to
hmm.
help them develop coping skills so that they don't later on make a stupid choice and take someone's life.
Try to get it upstream
Yeah,
before
exactly. Go
before it goes down.
upstream.
Mm.
Mhm.
Uh, Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that. That's
Oh, yeah.
that's impactful.
Surprise!
Surprise. Well, I mean, you said you were 11.
I was 11.
You were 11. How old was he?
Mhm. He was 8 my brother was 18, and the guy who murdered him was 23.
Yeah, yeah, crazy. Yeah, that's crazy. I can't imagine. So that kind of motivated you and led you down your whole path.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, I'm an expert in treatment of oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and, like, behaviors and all of those things.
Wow,
Mhm.
that's wild. Do you love it?
I absolutely love right now, like, I practice out of the Anxiety Treatment Center of Greater Toledo, so I
Hmm.
would say probably, like, 66% of my caseload is, like, OCD, anxiety disorder, and depression.
Hmm.
But then recently, something has happened, I don't know what has happened, word has gotten out that I do really, really well with treating what's called externalizing behavior problems, like criminal behavior, juvenile delinquency, oppositional, defiant disorder, those kind of things. And
Hmm.
so now all of a sudden, I've had a big influx of youth with those kind of disorders. And I'm like, yes. And I tell my receptionist all the time, I'm like, anytime anyone comes in with opposition, defiance, juvenile delinquency, send them my way. And she's like, okay.
That's the
It
hard,
was
like
funny.
that's the hard stuff, right? So you like kind of bringing on the challenging cases
Oh,
there.
yeah. I love
Yeah.
them. It was, like, funny, my receptionist, she got a phone call. She's like, "Do you want a new client?" And I was like, "Well, what's the presenting problem?" She's like, It's a youth, and it's, like, delinquency." And I was like, "Yes." And it turned out that, like, we had to postpone the person's intake
Mhm.
because they were to be in what's called JDC, so, like, Juvenile Delinquency Center for, like, a week or 2. And the parent was like, "You know what? We're gonna drive 2.5 hours to be in person because if Dr. Mata can't fix my child, then I'm putting them, like, in a boarding school."
Ooh, wow. High
Mhm. Yeah.
stakes.
Yeah, I was like, "Okay then. No
Wow.
pressure."
Well, due to HIPAA, I will not ask like how that turned out, but
Well, I don't know. That hasn't happened yet.
Oh, it has. Oh, it's coming. Okay. Wow.
Mhm. Yeah, it should be over the next few weeks. They'll
Okay.
be coming in, and I'll see what's all going on.
Well, good luck to you and good luck to them.
Yeah.
Because I mean,
Fingers crossed.
you know, boarding school, that doesn't sound amazing.
Yeah.
Um, so by day you're working on oppositional defiance and pretty hardcore behaviors.
Mhm.
So anyone listening that runs into those, and I actually know of a few of you, based on what she just said
Mhm.
and what you've shared with me. Uh, there you go. We got somebody to point you to with some of the challenges that you're facing. So what then, going from your history and the story led you to solve a problem that you saw and were directly impacted by, and now on a day-to-day
Mhm.
basis working with some pretty tough cases with high stakes. You're like, well, you know what? With all the free time I've got, because you've got 3 kids, right?
3 twin 7-year-olds and a 5-year-old.
And a twin mom. Wow,
Mhm.
you're just checking all the boxes, aren't you?
Yeah. Oh,
This
yeah.
is
Twin
this is going to
mom.
be a 4-part series, everyone. Just welcome to part one. Um, what led you to say, hey, you know, I'm going to write a book too?
So, before I had kids, I had been wanting, like, thinking, perseverating on writing a book. And I had this idea for this book called, like, Return to Play,
Hmm.
where the whole premise of it was, like, we all, like, adults, kids, communities, like, we all need to get back into playing.
Mm,
We're overscheduled and we need to slow down and we need to, like, do more playful things, joyous things, not because a lot of the time, I don't know if you've come across this, Zach, but people just perceive parenting as a drag, like something that they have to like cross off the list. And I'm just like, parenting doesn't have to be such a drag.
right.
And like, if you learn how to play with your kids, but at the same time have them respect you and follow boundaries. Um, and so I
Hmm.
had this idea for this book and I had started jotting down ideas. and I was still a professor at that time, and I had been contacted by a publisher, and they were like, "Hey, we want you to write a book." And I was like, "Oh, great. I have this great idea." And so I told them, they're like, "We don't want that book." And I'm like, "Okay, what book would you like?" And they're like, "We want a sports psych textbook for youth." And I'm like, "And you want a textbook?" I'm like, "College students don't read textbooks."
Mm.
And they're like, "Yeah, that's what we want." And I'm like, So then I started having this idea of like, okay, do I write this book? Do I not write this book? I talked to my father-in-law who's written a few books. I've talked to my mentor from grad school about it. And he was probably the one. He's always like, he's Dutch. So he's like, he just shoots it to you straight. And he looked at me and was like, "How do you know someone would actually read it?" And I'm like, "Hmm, that's a terrible thing to say." And so
I
then I
I
tabled it
don't.
for a while.
There's
I
nobody
don't
listen to this
know.
podcast, by the way. This is really just you and me. Like, you know,
I'm like, "I don't know." And so then that's when I started the Bright Spot podcast, because I was like, well, maybe no one will ever read my book. But then it was
right?
still like in the back of my mind. And my husband was like, "Why don't you just start brain dumping?" He's
Hmm.
like, "All of the ideas." He's like, "You have so many ideas out there." He's like, "Why don't you just start brain dumping and see what happens?" And then one day I had this, I used to teach sports psych
Hmm.
in college, and it's actually it's the intro chapter story. And the we realized, I had a co-teacher with me and coach, and we realized like students don't read textbooks.
Hmm.
And so he got pissed and started shaming the students on the first day of school and was like, "Why don't you guys read?" And so then we moved to like a very small like reader book instead of a textbook.
Uh-huh.
And he got up the one day and was like, "You all should be able to read this in the amount of time it takes to poop." And I was like, "Bam,
There it is.
that's my book." And so I was like, because parents don't have time. Like, they don't have time. They don't have time for all of the developmental theories and why this works and why this doesn't work. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to give people what they want. They want stories, and they want to be told what to do, and they want it quick.
Yeah.
So, like, every chapter is set up where it's a story, like an actual story that has happened either to me or friends or family or clients. Everything has been like, other than like my own family's stories, names have been changed. So
Hmm.
there's no HIPAA. Don't come for me, HIPAA. You cannot identify anybody. Um,
Protect the innocent.
and
Change the name.
right. Yeah, exactly. Change
Hmm.
the names. And then there's a story that is usually a fail, like a parenting fail. And then there's a practical tip on how to address that fail.
How many tips are there?
There are 29 tips.
Boom. 29 tips.
And there's 29 tips. And the other thing was, then after that, because a friend, Eva Daniel, read the book and she's like, "I want to know what happened to these people." And
Hmm.
then so then I added a third section that kind of like gave an update of like, where are they now?
That's cool. So you
Hmm.
can see not only what it is in theory, but then the results afterwards.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of them I don't know, because that's just the name of the game as a psychologist.
Right.
And so then I just make up something. Like, one of my probably my favorite one was like, "Yeah, I don't know what happened to her. Maybe she graduated from Boys Town and she went to culinary school and now she's gonna be on like America's, Bake Off." I don't know.
The Golden Bachelor Part Two. We'll find
Yeah.
out in 50
Oh, I
years.
hope not.
50 years. It's a cliffhanger, everybody. No, that's really cool. I like the progress of that kind of, epiphany. And it goes back to the previous question. He said you guys should be able, read this while, long enough to be in the bathroom. Well, for some that can be longer than others, but strategic or
Yep.
not, that's the thing.
Dads.
Uh, you know, it's a superpower.
It is, I
And
guess.
there's so many horrible jokes that I could do along with that. So I'm gonna refrain for myself and everyone listening. But so full transparency, I've got it. I got it this week, and we're gonna be
Mhm.
diving into it. My wife's gonna dive into it too. But and just in perusing, I'm like, oh yeah, this is gonna be solid
Because there's
because you're
also
funny.
pictures. I try
Pictures.
to be funny.
Should
There's
we?
pictures
Should I
of
read
me.
this with my kids? Is that like a thing?
Well, there's some swear words in it.
Yeah,
That was
we
also
can redact.
debatable. So like Eva was like, you need to take the swear words out. And I was like, but that's like that's some of the clients that I work with. And so I
Right.
talked to somebody else and they're like, no. They're like, leave the swear words in because then it's real and it's raw.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. But then it was funny, like one of our other friends, Eva and I's other friend, she's like, yeah, my daughter was like looking through it and then I realized there were swear words. So I took it away from her. And I was like, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, presumably we're all adults and that's just part of it. Because, kids are going to hear the stuff from somewhere.
Right.
And most of the people I talk to, they hear it from somewhere else, but sometimes they hear it from us mistakenly. Nobody's
Yeah. Oh
perfect.
my goodness. My
Yeah.
kids love the word like my thing is like when I get frustrated, I say damn it.
Oh,
And so my kids will sometimes like come up to me and they'll like tell me that they need to tell me something and I'll squat down and then in my ear they go, damn it. I'm like, stop it. I'm like, you guys can say it once. And then it's darn it. Like, darn it,
darn it.
children.
Yeah, the S word was a big thing for us recently because they're like, Dad,
Oh.
my daughter, I have so many things I need to talk to you about, like with the record button not on. I don't know what your rate is, but there's a lot of things happening lately. My daughter's 5, almost 6.
Mhm.
It's just she's going to be trouble in the future. But anyway, she said, she's like, oh, I can't hang out with so and so because they say the S word. I was like, they do? They're like, yeah, they keep saying stupid. I'm like, okay, all right, yeah, that's good. So we're not quite there yet, but they're
Mhm.
they're starting to learn.
We have the
Uh,
stupid list at our house.
the stupid list. What's the stupid list?
Yeah, so the stupid list is things that we are okay with them referring to as stupid.
Oh, interesting.
So like seaweed because we have a place on the lake and there was a bunch of like lake grass and it
Yeah.
was messing up all our fun and so we decided that we could call lake grass or seaweed stupid and muck.
So you've got like an approved go list for the things that you
Mhm.
can refer to as stupid. Anything outside of that
Yes.
box and list? Mm-mm. Okay,
Correct.
noted.
Mhm.
I like
Yeah.
that. You so prior to us becoming official recording and podcast like dialogue here, you had mentioned something, and I want to learn. Like I'm burning to learn more about this because I'm not familiar with it, and I don't know what it is yet, and so I'm really curious. You had mentioned something
Mhm.
about a 5-to-1 ratio.
Yes. So there's actually a chapter on it in the book.
Perfect.
It is the title of it is Your Ratios Off.
Okay.
So it's page 145. So it's the first one in the section of the warm and fuzzies. And
If you're
so
reading the book, you can follow along page 145 right now. Okay.
mhm. And so what the
Got it.
ratio is,
Hmm.
I actually stole it from John Gottman, who's like a leading expert in marriage. And
Okay.
so what he found, and it's like a crazy number. So he can predict at like a 95% accuracy whether or not a couple will divorce by
Hmm.
watching them interact for 5 minutes.
Wow. It's
Because
bold.
yeah, it's the number of positive interactions versus the number of negative interactions. And so the couples that don't divorce, it's 5 positive interactions to every 1 negative interaction.
Oh.
And so I've just kind of applied that to most of relationships because I also use it in coaching, but I also use it in parenting. And so, like, if your child is ever like talking about like there just seems to be strain or tension in your relationship,
Mm-hmm.
chances are you don't have enough positive interactions with your child. So you need to like up the fun and you need to like decrease the negative interactions.
Oh, I'm screwed. This is
Why?
no. Well, you just you think about that. You're like, wow. Okay, I'm really evaluating everything that's happened in the last 24 hours. Most of it's been pretty good, but
Yeah.
just sometimes things stick out. So that's interesting. So you're saying it's 5-to-1, 5 positive to 1 negative
Yep.
interactions.
Mhm.
I used to, so I had learned a thing. I didn't coin any of this, but used to train like my sales teams and leaders and stuff that I had in former life on the concept of the emotional piggy bank, and it's making deposits and
Okay.
withdrawals. So I'm seeing some alignment, but it is different because no one got divorced that I'm aware of at that point. Um, but but I don't know.
Mhm.
It's like your stories in a couple of stories, you don't know what happens. But if you don't have enough deposits in the piggy bank and you go and you
Yeah.
try to take more withdrawals from it, that relationship suffers, and now you're just like
Mhm.
you're overdrafting on your relationship, which then can
Right.
in the sales world can relate to or leadership world. If you're always going to your people saying, "Hey, can you give me this? Hey, can you do this? Hey, can you do this?" and there's no relationship building in a positive investment kind of way, they're
Right.
probably going to quit or it's not going to be pretty. And so that's a really interesting
Mhm.
spin on it. That 5 positive to 1 negative, and apparently, do these people know that he's watching them in the
Oh,
five
yeah.
minutes? Because some
Yeah.
people can totally, pretend for 5 minutes that things are real nice.
No, so, like, when I was in grad school, we actually did a similar experiment, so we would bring in college couples, and so they had to be together for at least 4 months, and we brought them into the lab, and we made, like, a fake, like, living room with, like, a couch and, like, fake plants, and there wasn't any windows, and I'm like, "Ooh," but we had, like, a camera on the side, and so what we did was it was, like, a 4-hour assessment, it was forever.
Wow.
We brought them in and we split them up and we had them take questionnaires, like, they had, like, 17 pages of questionnaires, and then we interviewed them separately, and then we brought them back together,
Okay.
and but what we didn't tell them was the last page of the questionnaire was a list of possible problems in your relationship, and we told them in, like, very fine print that was like, "Hey, just so you know, your partner will see this." And so then when we brought them together, we gave them each their sheets so they could see what the other person ranked, and then we had them choose the biggest problem in their relationship, and then they had to try to solve that problem in 10 minutes, and then to try to give a cool off period, we said that they had to plan a 3-day vacation, unlimited resources, they could go wherever they wanted forever, wherever they wanted and do whatever they wanted to do, and they didn't, they could had all the money in the world.
Hmm.
But so it was really, really interesting. And then we would code for like verbal and emotional abuse and all of that stuff.
Wow.
Mhm.
That's wild. Um,
Yeah.
4 hour assessment. Probably be good for some of us to get 4 hours.
4
That's a long time.
4-hour assessment. And the thing that shocked us was that the sheer number of couples that like engaged in like actual not like severe intense physical abuse, but
Ooh,
like there was a physical abuse in the session. I was like, "Whoa," like
that's
pushing and shoving but yeah, we're
that's
like,
not
"Oh,
good.
okay."
Yeah.
Mm,
And then they sign up. I mean, that could go a few different places, but domestic violence is never good.
no.
And they're just doing it when people are watching. So outside of that,
Right.
it's kind of like if somebody does something while you're watching, what are they doing when you're not? So that's good that
Yeah.
you were all there, I guess.
Well, because I had then the other thing was, like, when we did coding, so we had undergraduates watch the videos and, like, code for specific behaviors,
Yeah.
and, like, there would be times where, like, my undergrads would come to me, and they were, like, distressed because of, like, insults that the couple would, like, say to each other or
Mm.
pushing or shoving, and I was like, "Let's talk this through, like, you're a psychology major, like,
Hmm.
this is going to happen. Not everyone is living in a world of lollipops and rainbows."
Yeah, I think that's a misnomer by some, but if you are,
Mhm.
then fantastic. That's good.
Yeah,
Go
you
do
keep
it.
living in your lollipop and rainbows.
You live in your candy land. It's going to be great.
Yes.
Okay. So with the remaining time that we have, I'd love to hear just you pull it from wherever you want, like 3 things that you would throw out there, like from an advice. I mean, you got a whole book of it, but like 3 key
Mhm.
things that you'd throw out for us dads. And I know there's moms that listen to this too. So any of us
Yeah.
parents, um, that you throw out, but one specifically because it's in the field that you're in, and I do know about some different folks that have dealt with some of these things, and I have not, right? So I can't give fantastic advice on it. But for the behavioral stuff that you're like the oppositional behavior things that you're seeing, or
Mhm.
some of the harder stuff, what I've heard and found through these relationships is like they're like, I don't know what to do. Right. So
Mhm.
if someone is finding themselves with a kiddo that is having these issues, like what's something that you would suggest as a starting place for these dads that are like, I don't know. I don't know what to do.
The first thing, and it's actually a chapter in the book, and it's one of the ones that I'm trying to think. I'll give 2 different ones
Okay.
because I think they're important. So the first one, and people don't actually think this would work, and the story in the book is I think it's funny, and it's endearing, and I still, like, remember that, like, story in my soul,
Mm,
um, but I call it catch and ignore. And so the very first thing that I give a lot of my parents, like clients that have like more oppositional and defiant kids, is this catch and ignore technique. And so for a week straight, I tell them, I want you to catch them being good,
mm,
doing anything that warms your heart. And whenever you see them doing anything that warms your heart, you're going to praise the hell out of them. And you're
mm,
going to be specific. Like, I really like how you kept your cool there. Thank you so much. I really liked how you shared with your sister, and like be as specific as possible so they know exactly why you're praising them and
mm,
that they're going to do more of those behaviors. But then on the opposite side, you have to ignore all behaviors that grind your gears and that you do not want your child to do. You cannot say no. You cannot like intervene. You have to ignore the behavior unless it's hurting someone or something.
mm,
Then by all means intervene. But that's the big thing. And then when you're ignoring the behavior, and as soon as they flip into a behavior that you want them to do, like something that warms your heart, you're going to then stop ignoring them immediately and praise the hell out of them. And that catch and ignore, lots of people are like, that doesn't work.
mm,
And I'm like, just do it for 1 week and
mm.
see what happens.
My silence is indicative of my thinking, right? I mean, so
Mhm.
in some ways um, it's not Pavlovian per se, is it? I mean,
It's Skinner.
Skinner. Well,
It's because
okay.
it's all about operant, so it's called operant conditioning, and
Okay.
so it's dealing with attention.
Yeah.
So attention is your child's currency, whether it's positive attention or negative attention. They want it, and they want it all.
Hmm. I
And
like that.
so the catch and ignore is playing on the on child's main form of currency, which is attention.
Attention is your child's currency, and they want
Mhm.
all of it. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
I love that. No, here's where my mind went, just because, that's where it
Mhm.
goes. I thought of, I thought of, Penny from Big Bang Theory
Yeah,
and Sheldon every time he just like throw chocolates at her. But
yep.
in this case, we're throwing the attention is the chocolate
Mhm. Yep,
and ignoring, which I think would be difficult, especially if we're in a pattern. I would imagine if we're in a pattern
yep.
of something happens, we react, something happens, we react. So we're actually doing the reverse and potentially escalating that because we're doing it. Is that
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
So as hard as it would be and probably great for them to receive more currency, we have to we have to really suck that one up. And
Only put it in only we're only making deposits into their piggy bank
hmm
when they're being good.
yeah, that's the reward. Interesting.
Mhm.
And how long does one have to do this?
I
I,
say
I can't,
usually
but
with it for 1 week. If you can commit to that for 1 week, the it's amazing what happens.
guys and gals, we can all do anything for 1 week.
Oh yeah.
So that's totally worth it if you're running into that.
Hmm.
And we've been fortunate in that we haven't run into that a ton. My my middle child, the daughter is definitely the Spitfire, from what I can tell at
Hmm.
this point. So there's been some learnings there. And that's been a technique, maybe not exactly, but that's really good. I like
Yep.
the wording on that. Okay. So catch and ignore if you're running into the kind of
Hmm.
oppositional defiance, is that an appropriate term?
Hmm.
Okay.
Oppositional or defiant behavior.
Okay. Oppositional or defiant behavior. Um,
Hmm.
Catch and ignore. And I think my wife does that to me, actually, now that I'm thinking
Ha!
about it.
She might.
Yeah. Okay, guys,
Hmm.
secrets out if that's happening to you. Um, so we're taking out two birds with one stone. This is perfect.
Yep.
Okay. So thank you for that. All right. What are a couple other pieces that you'd throw out there that you think would benefit anyone listening?
I think the other piece, so I'm gonna take another one. Let's take one from the first section, which I call the fundamentals.
Hmm.
So the fundamentals, I think the biggest one there is consistent. So I title it consistency, consistency, consistency.
Hmm.
Like it is, in my experience, consistency is the cornerstone of all parenting
Hmm.
because humans love consistency. And we are not fans of inconsistency. We get frustrated, we get irritated, we get annoyed. I
Hmm.
much rather, and this is going to sound absurd, I would much rather someone be consistently not present, like a parent be consistently not present,
Interesting.
than inconsistently warm and present. So,
Okay.
like,
Why? Yeah.
if you're an absent parent, in my opinion, it's actually better for your child if you continue to be absent
Interesting. Okay. Tell me
compared to
more.
if you keep coming in and out of their life,
Yeah.
because then they start to wonder why they're not good enough for
Hmm.
you to stick around.
Okay. So just so I understand,
Mhm.
better to be consistently not present versus inconsistently warm, but there. Is that what we're
Mhm.
saying? Okay.
Like, inconsistent, so, like, sometimes you're, like, warm and fuzzy, and
Yeah.
then other times, like, you're cold and harsh,
Ah,
and
got
then
it.
warm and fuzzy, cold and harsh. Because then, like, look at this, like, look what I'm doing. It's
Right.
like the child doesn't know which side you're going to be,
Mm-hmm.
and then they develop, what's called an insecure attachment
Mm,
style.
interesting. So it kind of aligns with the ratio piece as well, too, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Because if you're outweighing your ratio with your 5 to 1, five positive, one negative, then that's balancing out the other piece, which is I don't know what I'm going to get. Which side of the coin am I going to get right now?
Right.
And so I kind of withdraw a little bit. Okay, let me put this in a real world perspective. Some of those that have
Yeah.
been listening for a while understand this part about me is part of the, catalyst for starting this podcast. But I'd traveled a lot for business in the previous life. And after 3 years of doing it every week and essentially being there on the weekends, but still not quite there because I was like in my business, Excel and all that every time. Um, I was like, I'm going to make a choice here. And my choice is to be around my family more. And that it worked for me. It was a good choice for me and our family.
Mhm.
But for those because I have a lot of friends that still travel, or have just gotten into it, or younger dads who are getting a promotion to a role where they're going to be gone. How does that play out from a consistency perspective and a presence perspective? Because presence comes up all the time with guys that are on this
Mhm.
podcast, even.
Yep.
For someone that's traveling frequently, and when I say frequently, I'm saying 50%
Mhm.
of the month. So 2 out of 4 weeks. How does that look? So I'm speaking to my old self at this point, but like, how does
Mhm.
that look?
I think so as long as you are being upfront with your children and you are telling them like, okay, I'm going to be here. And maybe I'm big on visuals. So
Hmm.
like you give them visuals of like, daddy's going to be here this week. Daddy's not going to be here this week, but he'll be back here. And like, you have to show up. That's another tip in the book. Like, be where you say you're going to be.
Hmm.
And I think there's little things. I was talking to this he's like a fractional CEO or something. Um his name's Steve Zirkle, and in like Toledo. And he is actually thinking about writing a book for like executive dads who, in that case, Zach, are like the same thing. Like they're leaving all
Hmm.
the time. And one of the tips that he like was telling me about that I absolutely loved was that when before he left, he would actually leave post-it notes for his wife and his kids throughout the house
Hmm.
so that when he was gone, his kids and his wife would find little notes and little messages tapping into those positive interactions. So
Hmm.
even though he's not there, and like he would consistently do it.
Hmm. Yeah, good on him because that intentionality and consistency, if
Mhm.
you do it a lot,
Yeah.
like that's a lot of work, but that's a good
Mhm.
kind of balancing mechanism. What about, okay,
Yeah.
so what about with today's technology? I mean, here we are across the way. Today's technology, we can connect via FaceTime and all that
Yeah.
stuff. So does that, I mean, you can fulfill some different things, but does that kind of help fulfill that ratio?
I think so because then you can like FaceTime, right? And like if you're
Right.
consistently FaceTiming like every day, then that's something to like work into the mix and make sure that you are touching base with them on a regular basis. But you
Yeah.
have to also consider like what works for you.
Right.
So like if I travel, I tend not to FaceTime my kids, not because they don't want to FaceTime me, but then because they're like, well, we know we want you here.
Hmm.
And so then like I always talk about like be where you are, like where your feet are. So like when you're at work, be at work. But
Yeah.
when you're at home, be at home.
Yeah. That's a big phrase that we use too,
Mhm.
and even on this podcast, be where your feet are and be able to focus that way. So
Yep.
interesting. No, that's was good. Um, well, I th there's so much we could talk about. So
Mhm.
you're like unofficially the go-to person right now on Skilled Dad. So I'm just gonna hit you up more and more. It's
Oh,
gonna be great. But yeah, party time, emoji time. Um, it's getting probably late in the time of recording. So I'd say thank you for being on
mhm.
here. And where can people find you? Where can they follow you? Where can they buy your book?
They can buy my book on Amazon.com.
Yep.
They have to look for the number two, and the easiest way is the no, and then the number two. Because lots of people are doing like the pound two, and
Yep.
then they can't find it. So the no two, parenting book.
Okay.
They could also easily search my name, Andrea Mata,
Yep.
and then LinkedIn, Andrea Mata, and I'm on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok, and it's all the same handle. Is it Twitter anymore? Or is it just X? Whatever.
X, formerly
But
known as Twitter.
the Twitter, yeah. It's Dr. Dre Mata. So DRDREMATA.
I love that. Dr. Dre Mata. Well, Dr. Dre Mata, also, guys, just you can look at the links in this show and on the website, and you go straight to her stuff too. Go get her book. You've heard a couple of things on it right now, and I'm looking forward to recycling some of your ideas about how I learned and what I learned. But most of all, thank you for your time on here, and thanks for joining us. And maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. I love to be on.
Awesome. Well, hey, if you've made it this far along, man, I know you've taken something away from this, and I'm looking forward to hearing about it. So tell me some of the takeaways that you had, what you applied, and what worked well. And if you think of someone else that comes to mind from what we talked about, share it with them. That's the number one thing about this
Mhm.
podcast is we are looking to help other people, help dads, help parents, and learn the things that we can do to then go and become the skilled dad and mom that we
Mhm.
can be. And we thank you for listening. We're looking forward to more episodes with great people like this.
Mhm.
And we'll catch you soon. You're listening to The Skilled Dad.